The Nurse Theorists, Portraits of Excellence. In this edition, we feature Virginia Henderson.
I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, as I was one of 8 children, right in the middle. If you couldn't be in the middle of 8, I was the 5th child. But growing up in Virginia was delightful. My father, he was an attorney, that he was devoting his time now to cases for the Indians where he felt justice had not been done them. They were all against the government, so he had to have an office in Washington. So until we could get established in Washington, we came to live at my grandfather's school in a house there, and Father came home as often as he could. My mother was quite a remarkable woman, I think. She very seldom scolded us or corrected us. When she did say something to us, it stuck. And I was a moody child. And Mother said to me once, very seriously, nobody else around, she didn't correct you in front of other people, but she said, Virginia, if you would learn to control your moods, you might be a fine woman. Well, for Mother to think that I might be a fine woman was just so encouraging to me that I took very seriously what she said that was standing in my way of it. The circumstance of my 2 older brothers being in the Army, my realization that this country needed nurses, and that if the war lasted for many more years, the military was going to need nurses. So I felt as if it was a way I could contribute to the welfare of the human race as well as anything else I could do. In 1921, I graduated from Walter Reed. I got terribly interested in patients at Walter Reed. I think that's one reason, I think that's one thing that influenced the kind of nursing care I gave. We were students in a hospital where we were taking care of men who had lost their legs, their arms, their faces had been mutilated. We felt as if there was nothing that we could do for them that would compensate for the sacrifice they had made. So it was an atmosphere that perhaps engendered in all of us a feeling that there's nothing too much we can do for a human being who is suffering, who we are serving. I think we graduated from the Army School of Nursing with a very high standard as far as giving service to people who needed us was concerned. If I sound as if I'm a know-it-all, I don't want to sound that way, but I'm perfectly aware that lodged in my feeble mind is more information about nursing and health care than in most nurses, because during the 50s I did this survey and assessment of nursing all over this country. I went to about 3/4 of the states, and I met the most wonderful people.
The beauty of Virginia's work is that it is a very simplistic and eloquent portrayal, description of what nurses do. I don't think that Virginia really created another abstract sphere in which to. I think she simply and very nicely described the work of the nurse and gave it a framework so that other people could understand it. Virginia's description of nursing, her definition, certainly is very easy for any nurse to equate to. From the time of my student days to now, where we have a proliferation of technology, her definition still hangs together and still has great meaning. And it describes the beauty, but also the power of what nursing really is.
Miss Henderson discussed her definition of nursing with Dr. Jacqueline Fawcett at her home in New Haven, Connecticut.
Virginia, I'd like to thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and agreeing to meet with us and to doing this interview.
Pleasure.
What do you think is the unique or distinctive contribution of nursing to health care?
Well, I've said this for so many years, I feel as if people are tired of hearing me say it, but I think perhaps you feel, as many people do, that they want to know whether I still think this. I still think, because the nurse is the only 24-hour worker, it seems to me we are the only people who say we will stay with you 24 hours, 7 days a week, if necessary. That they are the people who do for others what they would do for themselves if they had the strength, the will, and the knowledge. In other words, they're the patients almost their alter ego, and that we should try to get inside their skin and look at them and think, what help do they need? And I think that's a unique function, but I think it's also, while they're doing this, they're thinking, how can I help this person to be independent of me at the earliest possible time? And that differs so from a newborn infant to somebody who's dying. All variations in what they do, it's entirely, there's nothing you can standardize, because age affects it, and then the individuality of the person affects it. Now, I think it's also the nurse's function to help the person carry out the regimen prescribed by the physician. I don't like the word doctor's orders. I like to think that the physician prescribes, the patient still has the right to reject. So I don't say that we impose on this person carrying out the regimen prescribed, but we help the person carry it out. And of course that differs so from infancy to old age. There's nothing routine about it.
Are you saying then that nurses should be helping patients to understand the treatment regimen that's been prescribed by the physician?
Yes, I think we ought to help them to do that in the most constructive possible way. But I think the patient should never feel that they are forced to do something against their will or their better judgment, because I think that's one of the serious flaws in health care, that the patient involvement is not maximized or optimized, however you should express that. Now, I also say, and I think this is terribly important, that when there is no hope of the patients living constructively, or they don't want to live any longer, if death is inevitable, I think it is terribly important for the nurse to help the patient to have a good death, for everybody involved to help them to have what the kind of death the person would want to have. And I don't find many people talking about this, and I don't understand it, because I think our hospice care is about the best thing we've done. Then I go on to say, and this is what the World Health Organization is saying, that if the nurse is the best prepared person to help the patient, there's no doctor available, nobody else is better prepared than he or she is, we diagnose and treat. And I think we've got to have the courage now to fight for legislation that gives us the protection that we need if we are going to diagnose and treat. The World Health Organization is asking nurses to be the gatekeepers to the healthcare system and to be the principal providers of primary care. So I think nurses in every country have got to come out and say, we will do this or we won't do it. I think in this country we seem to be in a very indecisive state on this question.
The American Nurses Association social policy statement states that nursing is the diagnosis and treatment of human responses.
I know, but that's so vague that every time I quote it, I have to find it. And so it doesn't say to me what I want the American nurse to say is, I'm willing to take the responsibility for diagnosing and treating. Everybody understands that. And I think, say, diagnosed disease. We seem to be so afraid of treading on the doctor's turf that we resort to this, I think, nursing diagnosis of what I call symptoms. And I must say that if we are going to give primary care, and if somebody comes to you with something that you're perfectly certain is scabies, to talk all around that and describe all the symptoms I think it's foolish.
Given the resistance that we've already experienced with regard to getting the terminology, diagnosis, and prescription into nurse practice acts, do you anticipate that we would meet even more resistance if we were to implement the World Health Organization ideas?
I think they'd simply have to give in. I think we're doing it in some states, as I understand it. They are successfully doing it. And nurses are the largest group of health workers. And I think we have the public with us on so many of these issues. All I think we need is a little bit more confidence in ourselves, a little bit more assurance that this is needed to help the public. I say to doctors in public meetings all the time, the nurse in this country is a poor man's doctor. And what I hear from them is, you're perfectly right. We are doing it, but we're doing it, well, I think in every field we ought to do what the nurse midwife is doing. She functions just the way the obstetrician does, up to the limit of her competence. I don't see any difference between the nurse midwife delivering a normal delivery, a woman who's delivering a baby without the complications that he or she feels they couldn't handle. I don't see a bit of difference between that and the public health nurse handling the conditions that she knows she's prepared to handle. In fact, I never, even as a student, I would never succumb to that prescription. You can't tell the doctor what the patient is suffering from. You have to tell the doctor the symptoms. And I never hesitated to call up a doctor and say, I think the third child in the family has measles, or whatever I thought they had. It just seemed to me that if he had good sense, he couldn't possibly object to that.
Well, if we go in that direction, then how will nursing be differentiated from medicine? Or doesn't that matter?
It doesn't bother me one bit, because the doctors who have no nurse available to them are nursing their patients or letting them die.
Would you tell us what, from your perspective, is your most important work or contribution to nursing?
I say that I don't know what's the most important. I know an enduring piece of work that I did. I say I did it with a group of people. It was a group project. Florence Wald was very responsible for helping to design this, suggesting that we get a fund to do it. Leo Simmons and I did a survey and assessment of nursing research, and in doing it, we built up a very large file of 3x5 cards showing all the items of research that we had found in the literature, and as told to me because I did the field work. And people began coming up here to use that file. And it was probably the best source of information on the analytical aspect of the literature. But we realized that Florence especially realized that it wasn't fit for publication because it it wasn't uniformly enough done, and it wasn't, the annotations were not always what they should have been for publication. So we asked for money to put that into publishable form. And it was a survey of the literature from 1900 to the late 50s when we stopped that work. And I had, for many, many years, said the greatest need that we had in nursing was for an index to the nursing literature. So for 11 years after we got the grant, we worked on the indexing of the literature on nursing, the analytical, biographical, and historical aspects of the literature in English from 1900 through 1959. And it has contributed enormously, I think, to the development of better library resources. We lag way behind Canada and England in this country. Why, I don't know. But Dr. Bain-Jones said, with the publication of our annotated retrospective index and the current international nursing index, nursing came of age. And I quite agree with him. You cannot be a profession if you have no control over your literature.
That work in pulling together nursing research then eventuated in the publication of the 4 volumes of the Nursing Studies Index.
Yes.
And didn't you also have 2 publications with Leo Simmons on the earlier work?
Yes, we made a report that went to the U.S. Public Health Service, 50 copies. And then we published a hardcover book that was called Survey and Assessment of Nursing Research. And I think that was a great contribution, but since that is out of date, I don't know to what extent that is used. It's out of print now. I think it was a help, but I don't think it was used as extensively as it should have been.
Did your interest in doing the Nursing Studies Index project and the survey that you did with Leo Simmons stem from your concern with having a database for nursing practice?
If you talk to enough students that I worked with when I was teaching at Teachers College, I think you'd find that from the very beginning of my teaching there, I was focusing on helping students to use the current approach to the study of any problem. I don't use that term research with bated breath the way most people do. It's simply the best way we know how to form as accurate opinion as we can. Now, so that approach of identifying a problem, of researching the literature to find out what has been done about on this problem, what's been published, so that we won't repeat the work that other people have done, but build on it. Setting up a method, deciding on a method of study, collecting our data, interpreting the data, drawing our conclusions, and recommending any change in practice. That goes on in industry, it goes on in every profession. It's simply the best way we know how to deal with a problem. And I helped the students. That was one of the principal courses I taught at Teachers College for 15 years. That was from about 1930 on. And my emphasis there was on our learning the skills that more sophisticated professions have in using the literature. And student after student used to say to me at the end of that course, Miss Henderson, if I haven't learned anything else, I've learned how to use the literature. And I said, you couldn't have paid me a greater compliment, because that's what we are so lacking in. We've been brought up to ask an authority. We've been brought up to follow a procedure that's always been used in whatever school, hospital we had experience in. And that is so different from the approach that the sophisticated, better educated professions use.
A hallmark of the principles and practices of nursing is the fact that each practice that the nurse is to do is backed up by the available evidence, the clinical literature as well as the research literature.
That's what we've tried to do. I don't claim to have made an exhaustive survey in every case, but we've attempted it.
Did that feature of the book start before you began working on the book, or was that something that had always been a feature of the book?
I would not say it had always been a feature of the book. I think that the attempt to use physiological sources and other sources too was evident, but not as systematic as it has been since we've worked on it. Well, that's the way I write. If I have anything to write, in any message I have to the profession, I don't say do it because I say so. I say do it because I have found these and these pieces of evidence to show that it's a good way to do it. Edith Lewis teases me about this. She said, Virginia, when I ask you something, wouldn't you just sometimes tell me what you think? I don't want you to review the literature for me. But I don't see why anybody should change the way they do something because I think something's a better way to do it. I believe in presenting them with whatever evidence I have, or else just frankly saying I haven't any evidence, but it's my opinion. If I have to make a decision, this is the way I would go.
I wonder if you can tell us, Virginia, what for you are the major issues in nursing or in the broader arena of healthcare today?
There are two things that I tend to talk about most when I'm asked to give lectures and choose my own subject. And one is the question of the nurse being the gatekeeper of the healthcare system, advocated by the World Health Organization, and developing confidence in herself or himself as the giver of primary care, the principal giver of primary care. One very distinguished physician in this country, is known all over the world, has said to me that he thinks that the nurse of the future is going to be the family physician, and the physician is going to be the consultant to the nurse. And I think that's what the World Health Organization is saying, that we cannot afford to prepare enough doctors to give the primary care that is needed if we're going to distribute care evenly, if we're going to be fair to humanity and give everybody a chance at health care. And I think I think that's what we are doing now, but we are doing it sort of under the table. We're not coming right out and saying that we diagnose and treat. I think we are doing it because there's no doctor to do it, and the need's obvious, and so in the far reaches in the north where there are no doctors, nurses are doing it, sending a person by plane to a doctor or a hospital if it's something they can't handle. I think that nurse midwives are doing it all over the world, almost, except I have to say here, the doctors won't let us do it here. And I think it's kind of absurd that we have not established our right to do that. They'll let us do it for the patients that have no money to pay them the obstetrical fees that are charged. But that's one of the things that I talk about. I think nurses have got to either say they will do this or they won't do it. I think they've got to stop doing it without being recognized as the givers of primary care. That's one thing. The other thing that I really feel very strongly about is our failure to free our language from the jargon that separates us from the patient. I'm very critical of the nursing jargon and the medical jargon, particularly as it relates to the use of the medical record. We give lip service to health education, and then we withhold from the human being the one piece of paper or the one document that would tell them most about their health. And why we do it, I do not know. We give the military a copy of their record, but we withhold it from everybody else. I believe it's on the books that the medical record is the patient's property, but we don't treat it that way. They have a miserable time getting hold of their record if they want to see it. And then if they do see it, it's so full of our terminology that they don't understand, just as when you make rounds with patients present, or if you take a patient into an amphitheater, you talk about him, you don't talk to him. And I find that so wrong. To me, it just grates on me so that to me, it's so rude in the first place. The second place, we're wasting an opportunity to help that person. I think it's so clear that we are thinking more about our professional importance than the help that we ought to be giving to human beings. So those are two of the things that I hold forth on.
Do you think that nurses, as so-called consumer advocates, should be helping patients to understand what's on the medical record?
I realize that when we talk about our being advocates of the patient, it immediately puts the doctors on the defensive. They say, you're telling us that you have to protect the patient from us. We are also their advocate. Everybody now is claiming to be the patient's advocate, so I don't use that term. I think we share the responsibility that I think the doctor also has for making that patient's record a help to the patient.
What influences do you think your work has had on nursing and on health care?
Well, I think the widest influence comes from the fact that Athena Bennett, an English nurse who was head of the Nursing Service Committee of the ICN, really read that big textbook and saw in it something that she thought was quite special. At any rate, she reviewed it in 3 issues of the Nursing Mirror. And then she asked me whether I would write a little pamphlet for the ICN that would put the essence of what I was saying in that big book in a short space. And that little pamphlet has been translated into 25 languages, I understand, by the countries belonging to the ICN. And I think that's the reason that whenever I go to any foreign country, I find that people know who I am and are grateful for this very simple, clear way they tell me I have described what I think the function of the nurse is and how you implement that function.
The big text, you mean, is the principles and practices of nursing?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think I don't think very many people have said, this is what I think makes a good day. I think not many people have said, look at the patient and see whether they're breathing normally. Look at the patient and see whether they're eating properly, eliminating, moving. See whether they're, I'm skipping certain things, but see whether they are doing anything that's recreational. See whether they're learning something. See whether they have an opportunity to practice whatever religious faith they believe in. I try to make them see nursing in as complete a way as I can. I don't think there's anything any harder, really, than nursing, but I've tried to make it understandable by being quite specific, as well as being showing the breadth of it. I've also tried to explain what specific things go into making it a great service.
I understand that you've recently completed a project with James Smith, who is the editor of the Journal of Advanced Nursing, that he's writing your biography. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that project.
I would like everybody to know that it was not my idea. In fact, at a small dinner party at which Jim was present, Trevor Clay gave it for the two fellows from this country who belonged to the Royal College of Nursing, Vernice Ferguson and me. He said, "Virginia, what have you done about writing your biography?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, what are your plans?" And I said, "No, I have no plans. It's the last thing in the world I want to do." And he said, "Well, we have some plans." And then he said, "Jim, how would you like to go to the United States and stay with Virginia for a while and record her, what she has to say about her life as a nurse?" I don't know whether he put any fence around it, but writing a biography. And Jim said he would like it very much. And so that's what happened. And he stayed here in this apartment for 3 weeks, and we sat in the dining room in there, and I talked into a recorder, and he's gone home with I don't know how many of the little cassettes. And poor thing, he's got to make a story of that. I don't know anybody I can't think of anybody who I would rather have do it. I think Jim is a person of great intelligence and of tremendous amount of good taste and judgment.
Would you tell us what the focus of your current work is?
Well, it sounds pretentious, but I suppose that I have something like 50 letters a week to answer. The number of people who write to me, asking me questions, sending me things to comment on or criticize is unbelievable. It would have been unbelievable to me if it hadn't happened so gradually that I'm used to it now. But as I say, that I think sounds very pretentious. The only way I can account for it is that people are saying, who should we have, or who should we turn to? Well, if you're ever going to use Virginia Henderson, you better do it now because she's 90 years old and you're not going to have many more chances. That's the only way I can account for this sudden demand for my opinion about things and judgment on questions, and the number of speaking engagements I have. That I cannot seem to give the same address to two groups. I don't feel honest doing it, and so I struggle really. To me, it's the hardest work in the world to write a lecture. I don't see why they're sitting there patiently willing to listen to me. I refuse as many invitations as I can, saying, I will come, I'll sit in a room, I'll talk about anything that the audience is interested in our discussing. But I do not like to be in the position of lining out things to a group of people, implying that I think that they're interested in my opinion about this, unless they ask me.
In concluding, could you tell us what your plans for the future are?
I'm not a planner. It's one of my faults. I let life flow. I'm going to probably end by doing what people ask me to do. No, I don't say that's a virtue. I think it's a weakness.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for this very informative interview. It's been a pleasure to be with you and to talk to you about your work.
I've enjoyed all of you very, very much.
Thank you.
What I think is terribly important is to read Virginia Henderson, all of her books, to read her ideas, and you'll see the consistency and the growth that goes along with it. She's very much concerned with collaboration between the various disciplines, and that again is something that's been very hard for nurses to maintain over these 40 years. There's been a breakdown in the communication, especially between doctors and nurses, and she has always tried to help them come together. The other thing is that she's able to speak up, and in any kind of company.
Well, one thing I would say to all nurses is try to realize how important your work is. Try to feel so proud of it that nobody can make you doubt its importance. But at the same time, be modest about what you know or about what any other health worker now knows, because it's my belief that we hardly know beans with the bag open about health care. We have got to get the patient involved in planning care, in determining their needs, and we've got to give him or her the star role in anything that's done. We've got to start listening to them more carefully, trying to meet their needs more adequately, and getting our whole system based on the concept of citizen participation in health care.